The chamber was enormous, and Jake Morrison had been standing in it for 3 hours now, waiting for the council to finish their debate about Earth's future. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that caught light from the stars outside and threw it around in rainbow, patterns that would have been beautiful if Jake wasn't so tired of looking at them. He had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 5 years, and in all that time he had never seen the aliens this united about anything except now they were all united against humanity. Speaker. Velthar was a bug the size of a horse with too many legs and mandibles that clicked when he talked. He stood at the center of the chamber on a platform that rotated slowly so everyone could see him. Around the circular room sat representatives from 47 different species, and Jake knew that most of them had already made up their minds before this session even started. The vote was just a formality at this point. The charges against Earth had been read out loud, and they took nearly an hour to get through. Excessive military buildup was the first one, even though humanity only had fleets because the Council kept asking them to help fight pirates and defend trade routes. Territorial aggression was another charge, which was ridiculous, because every sea colony world humans had settled was either unclaimed or purchased legally through Council trade agreements. Refusal to share weapons technology was probably the real reason. They were all angry because human weapons worked better than anything the Council species had, and they wanted the designs, but Earth had said no. The last charge was dangerous unpredictability, which basically meant the Council was scared because they couldn't control what humans would do next. Jake watched as one by one the delegates pressed their voting buttons. The tally appeared on a holographic display that floated above the center of the chamber. 39 votes in favor of expulsion, 7 abstentions from species that did trade with Earth and didn't want to pick sides, 1 vote against from a small mammalian species called the Ven, who had always been friendly to humans. Not one of the major powers had stood with Earth. When it mattered, he thought about all the times human ships had responded to distress calls from Council worlds. He thought about the trade deals that had made some of these species wealthy. He thought about the human soldiers who had died protecting Council colonies from raiders and hostile forces. None of it mattered now because the Council had decided that humanity was too dangerous to keep around, up in orbit around the Council station. Captain Amy Hughes sat in the command chair of the Earth's diplomatic vessel Defiance and watched the proceedings on her screen. She had served with Jake for 3 years and knew him well enough to read his body language even through the video feed. He was angry, but he was keeping it controlled and professional, the way diplomats were supposed to. Amy had her hand near the communications panel, ready to signal the other human ships in the system if things went bad. There were 12 Earth vessels in Council space right now, and all of them were on high alert. Velthar's voice came through the translation system with that weird clicking undertone that all Kavaner had. The verdict was final, and humanity had 30 days to remove all presence from Council space. Every colony world, every trading post, every military installation had to be abandoned, or humanity would be considered in violation of galactic law. The way he said it made it sound like he was doing Earth a favor by giving them any time at all. Jake waited for the chamber to quiet down before he spoke. His voice was calm and steady, and it carried through the translation system to every species present. He said that the United Earth government accepted the Council's decision and would comply with the 30-day deadline. There was some shuffling and clicking from the delegates who had probably expected him to argue or beg for reconsideration. But Jake wasn't done talking yet. He looked directly at Velthor and then slowly turned to make eye contact with every delegate who had voted for expulsion. He told them they had just made the worst strategic mistake in their collective histories. Not because humanity would seek revenge, because that wasn't how humans operated, but because they had just released Earth from all the restrictions and regulations and political games that had been holding humanity back. They wanted humans gone because humans wouldn't be controlled. Now they would see what humans could really do when nobody was telling them what they couldn't build, or where they couldn't go, or how they had to behave. The chamber erupted in noise. Mandibles clicked, and tentacles waved, and several species started shouting in their own languages. Velthor was trying to call for order, but nobody was listening. Jake didn't wait for them to calm down. He turned and walked toward the exit with his head up and his shoulders back. He wasn't slinking away in defeat, and everyone watching could see that Amy had the ship ready to depart. The moment Jake came through the airlock, she had already filed their flight plan and gotten clearance from station control, though she would have left even without it. The Defiance pulled away from the Council station and set course for the nearest jump point that would take them back toward Earth space. Behind them, the Council was still arguing about what Jake's words had meant and whether they should be worried. On the trip back to Earth, Jake sat in his quarters and wrote his report for the President. He laid out everything that had happened and gave his recommendations for how humanity should respond. The Council expected Earth to be diminished and humbled by this expulsion. They expected humans to beg for readmission eventually. Jake wrote that humanity should do the exact opposite. Pull out of Council space completely and take everything with them. Every piece of technology and every resource and every bit of knowledge humans had shared, let the Council see what they were losing, and then build something new and better beyond their borders where they're outdated, the laws couldn't reach. Amy came to check on him after a few hours and found him staring out the viewport at the stars. She asked if he was okay, and Jake said he was better than okay. For the first time in 5 years, he felt like Earth was about to do something right. The Council had been holding humanity back with their rules and their fear and their constant demands that humans fight, their battles while giving nothing in return. Now all of that was over. Humanity was free to chart its own course. The message reached Earth 2 days before Jake and Amy did. President Linda Martinez called an emergency session of the Global Congress and began coordinating with military, leadership, and colonial governors. By the time the Defiance docked at Earth Orbital Station 1, the evacuation plans were already being drawn up. Humanity had 30 days to leave Council space, and they were going to use every single one of those days to strip their holdings bare and take everything that mattered. The Council wanted Earth gone, and that was exactly what they were going to get. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Brady stood at the observation window of the UESS Valiant and watched the organized chaos of the evacuation happening across 3 star systems at once. It had been 10 days since the Council vote, and humanity was moving faster than anyone thought possible. The viewport showed dozens of transport ships loading supplies from the colonial station below, while military vessels maintained defensive positions around the entire operation. Every human holding in Council space was being systematically emptied, and Kevin had never been more proud of his species. Director Lisa Grant coordinated everything from Earth's orbital command, and she barely slept during those first 2 weeks. Her office had screens covering every wall, showing the status of over 200 colony worlds and 50 military installations scattered across Council territory. Each location had a team assigned to strip it down to bare walls and load everything onto transport ships. The logistics were insane, but somehow it was all working. Lisa had divided the operation into priority tiers, with critical technology and military hardware being evacuated first, followed by industrial equipment, and finally personal belongings and furniture. The Council had expected humans to panic and rush out, leaving most of their infrastructure behind. Instead, they were watching a masterclass in military precision and organizational efficiency. Every building was being taken apart piece by piece. Every computer system was being wiped clean or physically destroyed. Every piece of manufacturing equipment was being loaded onto cargo haulers. If something was too big to move, it got destroyed. Lisa had been very clear about that in her orders, because she would be damned if the Council got their hands on human technology. After kicking Earth out, Kevin pulled up a tactical display and saw the defensive perimeter holding strong around every human position. The Council was starting to realize that humans weren't leaving anything useful behind. Some species were getting angry about it. The Kavanagh had sent several strongly worded messages demanding that Earth turn over the installations intact. They claimed it was required under galactic salvage laws. Lisa had responded by pointing out that salvage laws only applied to abandoned property, and nothing was being abandoned since humans were actively demolishing their own structures. Captain Ryan Phillips commanded one of the rearguard fleets. protecting the civilian transports as they made their way out of Council space. His battle group consisted of 8 warships positioned to intercept any Council vessel that got to CLOs. So far, nobody had been stupid enough to try anything, but Ryan kept his crews at combat readiness just in case. The Council ships stayed at a distance and watched, but their sensor sweeps were constant and aggressive. They wanted to see what humanity was doing, and Ryan made sure they saw enough to stay nervous. On the colony world of New Rotterdam, the evacuation was going smoothly under the supervision of Colonial Administrator Pete Jackson. The settlement had been home to 30,000 humans for almost 20 years, and now all of them were packing up to leave. Pete walked through the streets and saw families loading their belongings onto transports, while demolition teams worked on the power plant and water treatment facilities. Everything that made the colony function was being either removed or destroyed. The buildings themselves would remain, but they would be empty shells. Without any of the systems that made them livable, a group of traders who did business with the colony showed up asking if they could buy some of the equipment before it was destroyed. Pete told them no, and explained that Earth wasn't selling anything to Council species. The Thren complained that this was petty and vindictive, but Pete just shrugged and said that maybe the Council should have thought about that before voting for expulsion. The traders left angry, and Pete went back to overseeing the evacuation. Back on Earth, President Linda Martinez gave daily addresses to the global population, and her message was always the same. This was not a defeat, but an opportunity. The Council had freed humanity from decades of restrictions and regulations that held them back. Now Earth could develop any technology they wanted without asking permission. They could expand in any direction without worrying about Council approval. They could build the kind of civilization that humans deserved without interference from species that feared human potential. Linda met with the heads of every major research institution and told them the restrictions were lifted. Projects that had been forbidden under Council law could now move forward. Artificial intelligence research that went beyond Council-approved limits. Genetic engineering that the Council considered too dangerous. Weapons development that violated Council treaties. Faster-than-light drives that used principles the Council had banned. All of it was now on the table, and scientists who had been frustrated for years suddenly had unlimited possibilities in front of them. Dr. Rachel Kim led a team at the Lunar Research Facility working on theoretical physics that the Council had classified as prohibited technology. She had been waiting for this moment for 5 years. Her team had designs for a propulsion system that could outperform anything the Council species used, but they had never been allowed to build it. Now with the restrictions gone, Rachel had funding and resources and permission to see if her theories actually worked. The first prototype was already under construction, and preliminary calculations suggested it would exceed their most optimistic projections. Kevin received updated status reports every 6 hours and watched the progress with satisfaction. 90% of critical technology had been evacuated. 85% of military hardware was secured. 70% of the civilian population had been relocated. The numbers kept climbing, and they were ahead of schedule. Some colonies were completely emptied after just 8 days. Military installations that had taken years to build were being dismantled in less than a week. The Council started sending diplomatic messages asking Earth to reconsider the scorched Earth approach. They offered to negotiate better terms if humans would just slow down and talk. Lisa deleted every message without responding. The time for negotiation was before the vote, not after. Earth had accepted the Council's decision. And now, the Council could live with the consequences, Commander. Helen Carter oversaw the evacuation of Forward Base Atlas, which was the largest human military installation in Council space. The base had been built to protect Council trade routes from pirate activity and had been operational for 12 years. Now it was being systematically destroyed. Weapons were removed, first followed by shield generators and power cores. The hangars were being stripped of everything useful. The barracks were being emptied. Helen walked through corridors that had been home to 3,000 military personnel and felt a strange mix of sadness and anticipation. This chapter was ending, but something bigger was beginning. The civilian transports began arriving at new colony sites beyond Council borders during the second week. These systems had been surveyed by human exploration teams years ago, but the Council had claimed jurisdiction over them and prevented human settlement. Now that Earth was no longer bound by Council law, those restrictions meant nothing. Colony ships landed on worlds with good atmospheres and abundant resources. Prefabricated habitats went up in days. New settlements were being established faster than the old ones were being abandoned. Kevin watched a transport convoy pass by, the Valiant carrying families and equipment to the new territories. The ships were packed, but everyone aboard seemed excited rather than defeated. Children pressed against viewports looking at the stars. Adults talked about the opportunities waiting in unclaimed space. This wasn't refugees fleeing in desperation. This was a civilization choosing to walk away from a bad situation and build something better. By day 20, the evacuation was 95% complete. The last military units were preparing to withdraw, and the final civilian transports were loading up. Lisa looked at her screens and saw a map of Council space that was rapidly turning from blue to gray as human positions went dark. In another 10 days, humanity would be completely gone from Council territory. And the Council was starting to realize they had made a terrible mistake. 6 months had passed since the last human ship crossed out of Council space, and Director Zavek of Devek. Council intelligence was starting to feel genuine. Fear for the first time in his long career. He sat in his office reviewing reports that all said the same thing in different ways. Nobody knew what humanity was doing. The Thren had the best sensor networks in the galaxy, and they couldn't find the major human settlements. The Kevener had sent dozens of scout ships toward human territory, and every single one had been intercepted and turned around. Communication attempts went unanswered. Trade requests were ignored. It was like humanity had simply vanished. Ambassador Velsha from the Thren delegation came to meet with Zavek, and her 4 eyes were blinking in the pattern that meant she was deeply worried. She brought data chips containing every scan and sensor sweep her people had conducted over the past months. Zavek loaded them into his systems and studied the information carefully. The data showed nothing. Empty space where human colonies should be. Silent communications channels where there should be chatter. Dark regions where station lights should be visible. Humanity had retreated beyond the borders as required, but they hadn't just settled into the nearest unclaimed systems. They had gone deep into unexplored space, and they weren't letting anyone follow. Captain Chris Bennett commanded the patrol vessel Unity on the edge of what humans were now calling the Terran Sphere. His orders were simple and direct. No Council ships enter human space under any circumstances. No exceptions. No negotiations. Just turn them around and send them back where they came from. Chris had intercepted 17 attempted incursions in the past month alone, and the job was starting to feel routine. Council scouts would approach the border and human ships would appear seemingly out of nowhere to block their path. No shots were fired, but the message was clear. Lieutenant Amy Carson was Chris's first officer, and she enjoyed watching the Council ships turn tail and run. The Unity had new engines that the Council didn't know about, and could accelerate faster than anything the aliens had. When a Kevenar scout tried to make a run past the border, the Unity caught up to it in minutes. Chris opened a channel and politely informed them they needed to leave. The Kevenar captain tried to argue about freedom of navigation and ancient laws. Chris cut him off and said that human space was closed to Council vessels, and if they didn't turn around immediately, he would disable their engines and tow them back. The scout ship left inside the Terran Sphere. Humanity was busy with projects that would have been impossible under Council oversight. Engineer Daniel Foster worked at Shipyard 7, which was one of 12 massive construction facilities that humans had built in the past 6 months. The shipyard was 3 times larger than anything Earth had operated in Council space, and it was producing vessels at a rate that would have shocked the aliens. These weren't merchant ships or light patrol craft. These were warships built without any restrictions on weapons or shielding or power output. Daniel walked through the construction bay and saw a cruiser taking shape that could probably take on 5 Council ships at once. The design specifications were incredible. armor plating twice as thick as Council regulations allowed, energy weapons that drew power directly from the reactor core without limiters, shield generators that operated at frequencies the Council had banned because they were too hard to penetrate, missile batteries that could saturate an area with enough firepower to overwhelm any defense system. Daniel had been a military engineer for 15 years, and he had always known what human technology could do if it wasn't held back. He was seeing it built for real. Dr. Rachel Kim was having the best month of her career and possibly her life. Her propulsion research had moved from theory to working prototype, and the test results were beyond anything she had hoped for. The new drive system could cross distances in days that took Council ships months to traverse. Rachel stood in the control room watching data stream in from the test vessel as it completed another faster-than-light jump. The numbers were perfect. Energy efficiency was better than projected. The field stability was holding even at maximum speed. She had just given humanity the ability to outrun anything in known space. Admiral Greg Patterson reviewed Rachel's report and immediately authorized production. He wanted the new drives installed on every ship in the fleet as soon as possible. Greg had been planning for scenarios that the Council couldn't imagine, and having a speed advantage this significant changed everything. Human fleets could respond to threats faster. They could retreat from overwhelming force before getting caught, could strike targets and be gone before enemy reinforcements arrived. The strategic implications were enormous. On the colony world of New Haven, Administrator Kate Sullivan oversaw agricultural projects that used genetic engineering techniques the Council had banned decades ago. The crops growing in her test fields could survive in environments that would kill normal plants. Extreme temperatures, low water, poor soil, radiation exposure. Kate walked through rows of modified wheat and corn and vegetables that would allow human colonies to expand into systems that had been considered uninhabitable. The Council thought certain worlds couldn't support agriculture. Kate was proving them wrong. Colonel Stephen Wright commanded the Special Operations Division, which was basically a unit that existed to use all the technology the Council had forbidden. His soldiers wore combat armor with neural interfaces that let them control weapons and sensors with just thoughts. They carried directed energy rifles that could burn through most known materials. They had enhancement implants that improved reaction time and strength. Stephen watched his teams run training exercises and saw them move like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. If humanity ever had to fight the Council, these soldiers would be the tip of the spear. Back at Council headquarters, Zavek was getting pressure from multiple delegations to find out what humans were building. The Kavanagh were convinced Earth was preparing for war. The Thren thought humans were developing weapons that violated every treaty ever written. The smaller species were just worried because they had no idea what was happening. Zavek kept sending scouts and they kept getting turned away. He tried long-range sensors and got nothing useful because human settlements were too far away or too well hidden. He attempted to bribe human merchants for information, but there were no human merchants in Council space anymore. Speaker Velthar called Zavek to his office and demanded answers. What were humans doing? How big was their military? What kind of technology were they developing? Zavek had to admit he didn't know. The intelligence blackout was total. Velthar's mandibles clicked in agitation, and he said this was unacceptable. The Council needed information. Zavek pointed out that the Council had voted to expel humanity and humans were simply staying away as required. There was nothing in galactic law that said expelled species had to share information about their activities. Chris Bennett intercepted another Council scout ship, and this time the captain tried a different approach. Instead of demanding passage, he asked politely if humans would be willing to share basic information about their settlements. Just locations and population numbers. Nothing sensitive. Chris almost laughed. He told the captain that Earth had no obligation to share anything with the Council and suggested they get comfortable with not knowing. The scout captain asked what humans were so afraid of. Chris said, "Humans weren't afraid of anything, but the Council clearly was, and maybe that fear would teach them something useful." Amy monitored communications intercepts and reported that Council chatter was getting increasingly paranoid. Multiple species were convinced humanity was building a massive invasion fleet. Some thought humans were developing superweapons. Others believed Earth was trying to create artificial intelligence that would destroy organic life. The theories were wild and mostly wrong, but Amy didn't mind letting the council imagine worst-case scenarios. Fear was a useful tool. Dr. Rachel Kim got approval to begin installing the new drives on the first 100 ships in the fleet. The retrofitting would take 6 months, but after that, humanity would have a technological advantage that couldn't be matched. She knew the council was trying to figure out what humans were doing, and she knew they would eventually learn about the new propulsion system. By then, it would be too late for them to catch up. The physics were complex, and the engineering was precise, and it would take council scientists years to duplicate the work even if they somehow got the plans. Zavek sat alone in his office late at night and studied star charts showing the region where humans had disappeared. He had spent 40 years in intelligence work and had never encountered a situation like this. An entire species had gone dark and was building something in secret. The smart move would be to leave them alone, but too many council members were demanding action. Velther was talking about sending a military task force to force their way into human space. Zavek thought that was possibly the worst idea he had ever heard. But nobody was listening to his warnings. The distress signal came through on emergency channels that were supposed to be monitored by everyone in the sector, but Commander Nick Harper knew the nearest. Council ships were at least 3 days away from the Thren colony sending the call. His task force was conducting training exercises only 6 hours out, and he could hear the panic in the voices of the colonists as they described the pirate attack. 15 raider ships had overwhelmed their minimal defenses and were now systematically looting the settlement while the population hid in whatever shelter they could find. Thousands of civilians were in danger, and help wasn't coming in time. Nick looked at his tactical display and then at his orders, which were very clear about interactions with council species. Humanity was under no obligation to render aid to any council member. Earth had been expelled, and the council had made it clear they didn't want human involvement in their affairs. Nick could ignore the distress call, and nobody would blame him. But he had been in the military for 20 years, and some things ran deeper than politics. He opened a channel to his entire task force and gave the order to change course. They were going in. The pirate fleet was still orbiting the colony when 5 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel right on top of them. The raiders were flying old council military surplus ships that had been decommissioned and sold off years ago. They probably thought they were safe hitting a remote colony with minimal defenses. They had about 8 minutes to realize how wrong they were before the battle was over. Human weapons tore through pirate shields like they weren't even there. Railguns fired slugs that punched holes clean through holes. Energy beams cut ships in half. Missile salvos overwhelmed point defense systems. The pirates that survived scattered in every direction, and Nick let them go. They would spread word about what happened here, and maybe other raiders would think twice. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Phillips led the Marine deployment to secure the colony. Her teams moved through the settlement with practiced efficiency, establishing a defensive perimeter and checking for any remaining threats. The Thren colonists came out of hiding slowly at first, and then in larger groups as they realized the humans were there to help. Sarah directed her medics to start treating the wounded and her engineers to assess damage to critical infrastructure. Nobody asked the Thren if they wanted human assistance. The situation required action, not discussion. Administrator Tevron was the colonial governor, and he found Nick once the immediate danger had passed. The Thren was clearly shaken by the attack and confused about why humans had responded. Nick was supervising repairs to the colony power grid when Tevron approached and asked the question directly. Why had humans come to help? Earth owed the Thren nothing. The Thren had voted for expulsion along with most of the council. Nick stopped what he was doing and looked at the governor carefully before answering. He said that his people had responded because it was the right thing to do. It's not because of politics or because they expected anything in return. Human crews had heard a distress call from people in danger, and they had acted to save lives. That was what humans did, was who they were at their core. The council had never understood that about humanity. They thought humans helped others because of what they could gain from it. But humans helped because the alternative was letting innocent people die, and that wasn't acceptable. Tevron stood there processing this explanation, and Nick could see the governor trying to reconcile what he had been told about humans with what he was seeing with his own eyes. The repairs took 3 days, and Nick's crews worked alongside Thren technicians to get critical systems back online. The colony had lost several buildings to fire and explosive damage, but the main infrastructure was salvageable. Human engineers taught the local workers how to improve air defensive systems, and left behind spare parts and equipment that would help them rebuild. When it was time to leave, Nick refused any offer of payment or compensation. The Thren tried to insist, but he told them this wasn't a transaction. Help given freely didn't come with a bill attached. The rescue made news across Council space within a week. Multiple media outlets covered the story of humans saving a Thren colony, despite having no reason to do so. Some commentators praised Earth's actions. Others were suspicious and claimed humans must have ulterior motives. But the facts were hard to dispute. Human ships had responded to a distress call, eliminated a pirate threat, and asked for nothing in return. It didn't fit the narrative the Council had been telling about dangerous and unpredictable humanity. 3 weeks later, it happened again. A Ven trading convoy came under attack from raiders in an asteroid field, and the nearest Council patrol was too far away. Captain Jennifer Lee and her escort group were running security drills in a nearby system and picked up the distress signal. Jennifer didn't hesitate. Her ships jumped to the convoy location and drove off the attackers with minimal effort. The Ven captains were grateful, but also clearly confused about why humans kept showing up to help Council species, then a Kevinar. The station suffered a catastrophic reactor failure that would have killed everyone aboard if the meltdown wasn't contained. Human vessels detected the emergency broadcasts and responded immediately. Jennifer's engineering teams worked alongside Kevinar technicians for 18 hours straight to prevent the disaster. They succeeded, and thousands of lives were saved. The station commander thanked Jennifer personally and said he couldn't understand why humans would help the very species that had led the charge for Earth's expulsion. Jennifer just smiled and said that humans didn't hold grudges against civilians who had nothing to do with political decisions. The people on this station deserved to live regardless of what their government had voted for Council. Intelligence was tracking every incident and the reports. Landing on Zavek's desk were painting a picture he hadn't expected. Humans weren't hiding behind their borders building weapons for revenge. They were actively helping Council species in distress. 7 separate incidents in 2 months, where human ships had responded to emergencies involving Council members. Pirates defeated. Natural disasters managed. Technical failures prevented, and in every case, humans had refused payment or reward. They just helped and then left. Ambassador Jake Morrison started receiving communications from independent systems that weren't part of the Council. Small governments and colony groups that had heard about human actions and wanted to establish contact. They were interested in trade agreements and defensive pacts. Some wanted access to human technology. Others just wanted allies who would actually show up when there was trouble. Jake forwarded these requests to President Martinez and suggested that Earth start building relationships with non-Council species. The galaxy was bigger than the 47 members who had voted for expulsion. Within 4 months, Jake was negotiating treaties with a dozen independent governments. The terms were better than anything the Council offered. Earth wanted trade and mutual defense, but didn't demand that smaller species follow human rules or restrict their development. It was partnership between equals, not a hierarchy where big powers controlled little ones. The deals started small, but word spread quickly. Independent systems that had felt pressured by the Council saw an alternative in the emerging Terran. Alliance Captain Chris Bennett intercepted a Council intelligence ship trying to spy on human treaty negotiations with a species called the Trill. The intelligence ship was using stealth technology, but human sensors picked it up easily. Chris opened a channel and politely informed them they were in violation of Terran space. The Council captain tried to claim they were in neutral territory. Chris pulled up navigation data, showing they were clearly inside the boundary line Earth had established. The intelligence ship left, but not before its captain asked why humans were building alliances with species the Council had deemed too primitive for membership. Chris said that maybe the Council's standards were wrong in humans. preferred to judge species by their character, not their technology level. Back at Council headquarters, Speaker Velthor was dealing with growing pressure from multiple directions. Member species were asking why human ships kept responding to emergencies faster than Council forces. Independent governments were signing treaties with Earth instead of seeking Council membership. Trade routes that had relied on Council protection were now requesting human patrol coverage. The strategic situation was shifting, and not in the Council's favor. Velthor called another emergency session to discuss the human problem, but this time, the conversation was different. Some delegates were suggesting that expelling Earth had been a mistake. Jennifer rescued another Council vessel that had suffered engine failure in deep space. The crew had been stranded for days and running low on life support when human ships arrived. Jennifer's engineers got their systems back online and provided supplies to see them home safely. The rescued crew were from a species that had voted for Earth's expulsion, and they seemed ashamed when they thanked her. Jennifer told them not to worry about politics. Human crews responded to distress calls because that was their duty. It was that simple and that complicated at the same time. 18 months after the expulsion vote, Speaker Velthor stood before the Council chamber and did something he had never imagined he would have to do. He called an emergency session to discuss reversing the decision to expel Earth. The chamber was packed with delegates. We're all arguing before the session even officially began. The Kevinar Collective had lost 3 more colonies to pirate raids in the past month, and Council fleets were stretched too thin to provide adequate protection. Meanwhile, every system under human defense agreements remained completely secure. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Velthor waited for the noise to die down before speaking. He laid out the strategic situation in terms that even the most stubborn delegates couldn't deny. Human military power had grown beyond all projections. Their technology now surpassed Council standards in multiple critical areas. And perhaps most importantly, they were building an alliance network that rivaled the Council itself. Independent governments that would have naturally sought Council membership were instead signing treaties with Earth. The balance of power in the galaxy was shifting, and the Council was on the wrong side of that shift. The Thren ambassador stood to speak, and her statement carried weight because her species had one of the largest intelligence networks in known space. She said that Thren analysts had been tracking human development since the expulsion, and the results were frankly terrifying. Human shipyards were producing vessels at rates that shouldn't be possible. Their propulsion technology allowed them to cross distances in a fraction of the time Council ships required. Their weapon systems were generations ahead of anything the Council had, and their military doctrine emphasized speed and overwhelming force in ways that made traditional Council defensive strategies obsolete. But the Thren ambassador also pointed out something else that many delegates seemed to have forgotten. Despite having this military advantage, humans weren't using it for conquest or revenge. They were using it to protect trade routes, respond to emergencies, and defend their allies. Human crews had rescued Council vessels and protected Council colonies on multiple occasions without asking for anything in return. Whatever the Council had expected from expelled humanity, this wasn't it. The Thren ambassador formally proposed opening negotiations for Earth's readmission to the Council. The debate that followed lasted for hours. The Kevinar delegates were furious because admitting they had been wrong about humanity would damage their political standing. Smaller species were worried about what kind of power Earth would demand if they were allowed back. But the simple reality was that the Council needed humanity more than humanity needed the Council. Systems were requesting human protection. Trade convoys wanted human escorts. Independent governments were choosing the Terran Alliance over Council membership. The strategic calculus was undeniable. Admiral Helen Carter received the Council's official diplomatic overture while she was overseeing fleet exercises in the Terran sphere. 200 warships were conducting coordinated maneuvers that demonstrated capabilities the Council didn't even know humans possessed. Ships moving in perfect formation at speeds that should have been impossible. Weapons firing with accuracy that exceeded theoretical maximums. Shield systems absorbing hits that would have destroyed Council vessels. Helen watched the exercises with satisfaction before reading the Council's message. They wanted to talk about Earth's readmission, and they were offering terms that would have been generous before the expulsion. She forwarded the proposal to President Martinez along with her own assessment. The Council was offering full voting rights, removal of all previous technology restrictions, and a seat on the Council's Security Directorate. It was actually a better deal than Earth had before. But Helen noted in her report that accepting would mean going back to a system where human decisions required Council approval. It would mean treaties and regulations and political compromises. It would mean giving up the freedom humanity had gained by being expelled. Linda Martinez called a cabinet meeting to discuss the offer, and everyone had opinions. Secretary of State Brian Hughes pointed out that Council membership would provide legitimacy and access to established trade networks. Defense Secretary Patricia Cole argued that Earth was stronger outside the Council structure. Economic advisor Marcus Flynn noted that human colonies were thriving under the new system. Ambassador Jake Morrison, who had been recalled to Earth specifically for this meeting, listened to everyone before. Giving his recommendation, Jake said that the Council wanted Earth back, because humans were now strong enough that the Council needed them. But that strength came from being free of Council restrictions. Going back would mean accepting limits on military development, technology, research, and territorial expansion. It would mean subjecting human decisions to committee votes and political maneuvering. Earth had built something better in 18 months of independence. They had allies who trusted them because humans had proven themselves through actions, not politics. They had technology that was advancing without artificial limits. They had freedom to become whatever they chose to be. Linda listened to all the arguments and then made her decision. Earth would not seek readmission to the Council. Instead, they would propose something different. A treaty between the Council and the Terran Alliance as equals, two independent powers recognizing each other's sovereignty and establishing mutual trade and defense agreements. Earth wouldn't be a member asking for permission. They would be a partner negotiating from a position of strength. The proposal shocked the Council when it was delivered. Humanity wasn't asking to be let back in. They were demanding to be treated as peers on the galactic stage. Velthor's mandibles clicked in agitation as he read the terms. Earth wanted the Council to formally recognize the Terran Alliance as a sovereign entity with equal standing. They wanted unrestricted trade access without Council, tariffs, or regulations. They wanted mutual defense agreements that didn't require human forces to operate under Council command. And they wanted all of this without giving up their independence or accepting Council oversight. The negotiations took 3 months, and they were difficult. Council delegates who had voted to expel Earth now found themselves in the awkward position of needing human cooperation. The Kevener tried to demand concessions, but Earth's negotiating team, led by Jake Morrison, simply refused. They weren't desperate. They weren't begging. They were offering partnership, and if the Council didn't want it, then humanity would continue building their alliance without Council involvement. The threat wasn't empty, and everyone knew it. Colonel Eric Murphy commanded the security detail for the human delegation when they returned to Council space for the final treaty signing. He watched delegates who had once dismissed humanity now scrambling to shake hands with Jake and other Earth representatives. The shift in power dynamics was remarkable. Species that had voted for expulsion were now asking about trade deals and defensive pacts. Independent governments that had signed with the Terran Alliance were being treated with new respect because they had Earth's backing. The final treaty was signed in the same chamber where the expulsion vote had taken place. Velthor stood beside President Martinez as they both placed their marks on the document. The treaty recognized Earth and the Terran Alliance as an independent power with equal standing to the Council. It established trade agreements that benefited both sides. It created provisions for joint military operations against pirates and other common threats. And it included language specifically stating that neither party would interfere in the internal affairs of the other. After the signing ceremony, a junior Council aide approached Eric with a question that was clearly bothering him. He asked if humans would actually honor the treaty or if this was just political theater. Eric considered the question seriously before answering. He said that humans always kept their word even when it cost them. Earth would honor every provision of this treaty because that was who humans were. But the age should remember how this situation came about. The Council had tried to remove humanity from the galactic stage. They had expected Earth to fade into irrelevance. Instead, humans had built their own future on their own terms. Jake gave one final address to the Council before the human delegation departed. He thanked them for agreeing to the treaty and expressed hope for productive cooperation between the Council and Terran Alliance. But he also reminded them of an important lesson. The Council had voted to expel Earth because humanity wouldn't be controlled. That hadn't changed. Humans were still independent, still unpredictable, and still unwilling to accept limits imposed by others. The difference now was that the Council understood what humanity could accomplish when given freedom to succeed. Back on, celebrations erupted as news of the treaty spread across human worlds. But President Martinez's address to the population struck a different tone. She didn't gloat about victory or mock the Council for their mistake. Instead, she talked about what humanity had learned from this experience. They had learned that they didn't need permission to be great. They had learned that their strength came from their values, not from political structures. They had learned that helping others and standing up for what was right mattered more than seeking approval from those who feared human potential. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the human fleet prepare to return to Terran space. The ships around her represented everything humanity had accomplished in 18 months. Advanced technology developed without restrictions. Military power built to protect, not to conquer. An alliance structure based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical control. The Council had expelled Earth expecting humanity to fail. Instead, humans had shown the galaxy what they were truly capable of achieving. The final message that broadcast across all human channels was simple and defiant. They wanted us gone, so we left. And in leaving, we showed them exactly what humanity can accomplish. This is our galaxy too, and we're just getting started. The words captured everything about the human spirit that the Council had failed to understand. Determination to succeed against any obstacle, refusal to be diminished by others. An absolute certainty that humanity's best days were still ahead.